Thank you, and welcome everybody to this session run today by Stephen Sterling, who's an Emeritus Professor of Sustainability Education, Centre for Sustainable Futures, University of Plymouth. And Stephen is a well-known expert in this field of sustainable education, and a long-time friend of the Schumacher Institute and a distinguished fellow of, I'm very pleased to say. He has a new book out called Learning and Sustainability in Dangerous Times. And I'm really curious to find out what dangerous times means in this case. I've a fairly good idea from the work we do, but it'll be great to hear what Stephen has got to say. So, Stephen, thank you very much for coming along today, and over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian, and hi everybody. Thanks for attending, and thanks to the Institute for hosting this event today. Whether you've got my book or not, and whether you're going to read it or not, is immaterial, really. I'm just going to talk around not so much the content of the book, as some of that will come out, but the context, really, and why I wrote it. The whole topic, as you know, of societal change, learning and the role of education is vast, and all I can do is sort of skate through some of the ideas which preoccupy me and which went into the book today. I'm going to talk for maybe 40 minutes or so, maybe 45, depending how it goes, and that leaves some time up to around about 5:30 when we can discuss some of the issues coming up. I think it might be appropriate just to acknowledge the terrible news last week about the closure of Schumacher College, the Institute's sister body here in Devon, bringing to an end 30 years of in-depth study and groundbreaking courses and the dissemination of powerful ideas and initiatives all over the world related to an ecological view of the world. And also on Stephen Harding, whose sad death was announced curiously within days of the public news about the closure of the college. So these two things together, Stephen, of course, was a huge leading influence on Gaia theory, and his work was fundamental to the ethos and the work of the college. But those two events together seem to be something of an end of an era down here in Devon, anyway. And I just wanted to mention those things because their work was so tangential to that of the Institute. So I'm not going to talk about the books that I said in any detail, more about the background. And the context, of course, is the whole where we are now, where humanity is now, the likely futures and that of the planet, the whole sort of idea of existential threat. And the possibility that we might just secure a better future than, to use David Orr's words, the one in prospect. I'm sure everybody on this call will know this broad issue, or the systemic issues which face us. So I'm not going to talk about that too much, really concentrating more on how does learning and education fit into this whole picture and trajectory of going forward. I'm also going to talk about the international debate around this, which is now hotting up, about the role of education. I'm going to touch on that in some detail. So I think the sort of opening paradox, which concerns me and has done for some years, I'm just going to read it out because it's actually from a line from a paper I've just written. Education is seen as critical to the possibility of securing a livable future. Yet at the same time, this depends on the transformation of education, which is, however, deeply rooted in the current social order and culture. So there's a sort of paradoxical issue here where education is seen as an agent of change, but it's actually stuck to some extent in the issues which prevent it from being an agent of change. So this issue is fundamentally paradigmatic, and I'll come back to that shortly. So I think I'll just launch in rather than give you kind of a context to, so to speak. I think it'll become obvious as I go along. I'll comment appropriately. So I'm going to start off with this great cartoon. I like, when I'm teaching, I like use of cartoons because they're great. And this one from the Australian cartoonist, Good Learning, I think is just fantastic. So if I just read that out. Our way of life is being threatened by a dark force. We must defend our way of life. What is this dark force which threatens our way of life? It's our way of life. So to me, speaks 1,000 words, if you like. But to just give you a little taste of where I fit into this, without going any detail, this is where I came in. Around the early 70s, I was wondering what to do, and I was just sort of plugged in quite intensively to the wave of environmentalism which attended the UN Conference on the Human Environment in 1972. That little book on the left, Teaching for Survival, which I thought was a heck of a title. I found that in a bookshop in London and came out and I thought maybe I should go into teaching as some way of addressing these issues. Conference book at the time, and there we are. That was 52 years ago, and in a way I've been I've been on this conveyor belt ever since. And of course the issues have become intensified in that 50-year period. It's not just a matter of pollution and resource depletion, which I think was the main agenda at the time. So if we jump forward, these books are very recent, and you will know there's an awful lot of other books around these themes coming out all the time now, given the severity of the sort of meta crises we are facing. And the two books towards the top, The Future We Choose by Christina Figueres and Tom Carnac, and Regeneration by Paul Hawken, I dipped into when I was writing my own book. So in all these years, my concern may be summed up in this slide. It's my key question, if you like: how should and how can education and learning be rethought and reconfigured to make a significant and central contribution to achieving a more sustainable and just world? Which, at the face of it, is a you might think is a sufficient question. Excuse me, just a sec. But over time, when I've reflected on these issues, I've come up with I thought it wasn't a sufficient question. So if you look at this again, it's the same issue, but viewed from a deeper level. What is the nature of the change of consciousness that appears necessary to achieving a safe, more ecologically sustainable and livable society, which can both survive and thrive? And also, what changes may be required in the way we view and practice education and learning if they are to contribute fundamentally to such a change of consciousness? So to me, that's a deeper way of looking at this knotty problem, if you like, this issue. So just to go very quickly through the context, if you like, which has been there on the agenda for that 50 years, and as I said, it's got more intense since. So you will know about, I'm sure, about the this idea of the polycrisis. I'm not sure who first came up with it. This is a slide from the World Economic Forum, showing all the interlinks between these issues. But I'm sure many will know that in a way, this is nothing new. So again, going back to 1972 and the Limits to Growth report and the Club of Rome came up with the idea of the world problematique, where all these issues were interlinked and you couldn't actually address one without addressing them all in some way. So this is not a new idea. It's just become more knotty, if you like, talking about wicked problems. This is very, very wicked. And this is the complexity we are faced with. And then still looking at that level, major reports on Earth futures. So a global tipping points study came out last year. It was written for the COP conference, and is really worth looking at if you haven't. led by the University of Exeter. And in July, UNEP produced Navigating New Horizons, which is also a really important, I think, very clear report on where things are. Now, to me, I mean, I'm interested in all this stuff. I have been for years, and a lot of other people are. I'm sure you are too. And my question all the time is that it seems like educational discourse is somewhere behind the curve. It's not commensurate with the way the world is going. It seems to me it's not. I can't think of the right word, but congruent. I think congruent really with where things are. And this has always bothered me, if you like. But it's not that nothing's happening. And so we'll just look at what is happening from an educational point of view. So you may well know that just a couple of weeks or so, we've got the UN Summit of the Future, which was initiated by Antonio Guterres, and it's another attempt to try and put systems back on course, if you like, with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, not going in the right direction at all. And so it'll be another massive summit. I hope, I wish it well. I hope it makes a significant difference to all of that. And at the same time, UNESCO has been very busy, as you may know, on sustainability and education. And I take my hat off to UNESCO. I've done a lot of work with them over years. And if it wasn't for their work, we'd be a lot more behind in this whole area internationally than we actually are. So I'm just going to say a little bit about that work, and then in a sense critique it to some extent. So going back to 2016, the UNESCO produces each year a global educational monitoring report, a GEM. And 2016 was the first time they looked at sustainability in people and planet. And that's a little picture from that report on the left. And I chose it because of the wording. Education has the potential to transform the planet, but first we must transform our educational system. So I'm going to say quite a bit about that. And the quote towards the right, we must change the way we think. So in turn, education must change. And I like the quote from the Assistant Director General 4 years ago. We are increasingly asking if what people learn is truly relevant to their lives, if what they learn helps to ensure the survival of our planet. Well, I wonder what your answer would be to that. And that's in the document on the right, the Education for Sustainable Development Roadmap, which takes their policy work up to 2030 in the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. That's all well and good. So, and then the other key thing, which I'm mentioning all this because I covered it in the book in some depth and critique it too. So the next thing that happened chronologically is that UNESCO then put together or commissioned a thing called the International Commission on the Futures of Education, which consulted very widely over 2 years and reported in 2021. And that's the report, and you can have a look at that anytime you like. Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education. So again, I know I've been cherry picking, but those two quotes come out of that report about education must be transformed, and education often perpetuate the very conditions that threaten our future. So here's again the paradox, and how can it be an agent of change if it's actually in a way maintaining the status quo? So this is exercising minds at an international level, at least. I wouldn't say that the report is good. There's an awful lot in it which I think is good. It's reaffirming education as a public good, which is a major plus, I think, in the face of increasing pressure from the neoliberal lobby and the privatization, commodification, and marketization of education. So UNESCO is a standard bearer for the public good and seeing education in a more holistic way. That's all good. And then chronologically again, Antonio Guterres initiated this conference in 22 years ago, September 2022. And again, some nice words, about transforming education and reimagining education, So that conference took place. And the major emphasis from that conference was re-emphasizing ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development. And I'll say a word or two about that shortly. But continuing the story, where are we now? We've got the International Commission on the Future of Education and the influence of that, and that's developed into this UNESCO's Futures of Education initiative, and that's a screenshot. Just plucked that down this morning. Have a look at that text if you can, if you've got time. And it's all good stuff, and I'm not critical of that. I think it's what's needed, and it's sparking intelligent debate about what education is in our current state of affairs and where it's going and what the role should be and so on. And then going bang up, this is current, and then going bang up to date. This initiative is leading to this, which is, as you can see, International Forum, the Futures of Education, to be held in Korea in December, renewing education to transform the future. And there again, that's the concept note quote from on the bottom for that conference. You can't argue with that. But again, you've got this paradise in the second line. Education is crucial to this change, of course, yet education itself must be transformed. Right, excuse me a minute. So what's going on here? How do we actually make progress, given that time is short? That we need to make some. There's an awful lot of reports, including UNEP and all the rest of it, and his major agencies saying that we need to change course societally in a major way. So where does education and learning come into that if it's in a sense stuck to some extent? And again, just to bring up to date, so the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which runs the SDG Academy, Sustainable Development Goals Academy, asked me and several others to produce papers on a journal, special issue, that's the Journal of Education for Sustainable Development, critiquing this whole area, really, and the editors in their invitation are saying, is ESD up to the job of transforming education, let alone society? That, in a nutshell, that's what they're asking. So I thought, well, I better say yes to that invitation. So that's another week's work, just about, and that went off fairly recently. But for me, and those of you who know my work, I think the issue here is the critique which UNESCO and its stakeholders put forward of educational policy and practice in the mainstream is just not sufficient. It's just not deep enough. And I think that's getting to the heart of it, if you like. Now, the next slide is based on Ken Wilber's work. Those of you who know Ken Wilber is an American philosopher, and he famously came up with some years ago a model called the integral model, which looks like this, integral quadrant model. And if I get the pointer to work. So the critique here is, and it's not just me saying this, of course, education for sustainability tends to focus on the individual here and the exterior dimensions of knowing experience here, rather than the collective and interior dimension of collective cultural worldview and paradigm belief and assumptions, which is here. And that includes a lot of UNESCO's work too. So it's very much about, knowledge and skills and behavior change and all that sort of thing, rather than the cultural assumptions which inform our worldview in the first place. So this, in a sense, summarizes where the emphasis of my work has been for some time, trying to be clear about this, or clearer, let's say. Because if we want societal change, it's got to be at a cultural level, and it's got to be around here, around sort of cultural meanings and values. Now, going on from that, if you can just hold that idea, and you come back to me later if you want to question that. Going on from that, if I go back to that UNESCO report, UNEP report, which I only came across fairly recently, they have the really interesting commentary on levers towards desirable change, but also brakes on that change. And they found, I think I've got a quote, actually, I'm going to read it out if I've got it. Yeah, okay. This report finds small but growing signs of, and I quote, a mindset of continuous learning with active unlearning of ingrained beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors, consistent with an emerging paradigm where the status quo is rejected in favor of sustainability transitions. And although transforming cultural paradigms, and this is on here, mindsets and worldviews is very often very difficult, it potentially offers the most powerful leverage point for effecting change in societal systems. So, that's really interesting. They found some evidence of rethinking, or thinking, if you like, rethinking our values. So my question is, if that's the case, how fast can formal education become catalytic rather than marginal to this kind of what you might call a learning revolution? So again, those of you who may know my work, I've been making this distinction for some years, and it's not just me, it's echoing a lot of other people too, between fundamental meta worldviews, if you like, the mechanistic, analytical, and ecological, holistic, and there's lots of other words we can use to describe these two ways of interacting and perceiving in the world. And of course, the left-hand side is still dominant. And I hope I'm not oversimplifying things. If I say, the Institute, the Schumacher Institute, is really trying to develop a systemic consciousness, which is towards the right, and what that means in practice. And it's, this is quite a big argument. I'm not arguing that we do away with the left-hand side, even if that was possible, but it shouldn't be our master, it should be our servant. And that reminds me of the work of Ian McGilchrist, some of you may have come across, who makes a very, very sophisticated argument about these two ways of seeing the world, and argues that we need to reassert the more holistic, connective, systemic, ecological way of seeing and doing and being. So, I've summarized that in this slide. This comes from some years work of some years ago, the left hand and the right hand, and to use Fritjof Capra's terminology, he's saying we need a shift of attention. It's not sort of switching from one to the other, more a shift of attention and emphasis towards a more systemic way of thinking, because the world is fundamentally systemic. You know, everything relates to everything else. Okay. So that raises, you know, if this argument, the argument I'm putting forward is valid, it raises questions about how we go forward, both in society and in education. Oh yeah, so these are little icons we came up with some years ago, like a box thinking or web thinking. Fairly obvious, really. So worldviews and futures, you know, are we going to maintain the mechanistic reductionist emphasis and trajectory and way of perceiving and doing, or can we embrace a more dynamic, ecological, systemic way of seeing the world? And when I wrote the book last year, I came up with several descriptions of these two ways of doing and seeing. And one was in Figueres and Carnack's The Future We Choose, which I'd recommend. And they talk about, you know, a chaotic future or the world we must create, and then they describe what that looks like and how we might get there. And also the book on the right, Earth for All, which was a report to the Club of Rome, which I'd recommend, talks about the great leap forward that we need to embrace, and that chimes with work by the Great Transition Initiative in the States, which I'm a member of, which puts an awful lot of work into, you know, what the transition should or would look like and how we make it work. But it's, you know, these are fundamental issues, and they're not easily progressed, if you like. But this interest in worldviews has influenced my thinking and work for some years, and I'm going to just say one or two things about that, because if you're interested in my work, this is sort of fundamental, and it's explained much more detail in the new book. So this diagram I came up with some years ago, again, not just me, but based on others' ideas, and it's just suggesting that there are kind of levels of knowing in our makeup, and the way we see the world down here influences our values, which influences our norms and assumptions, which influences our ideas and theories, which influences our actions. So there's sort of a dribbling sort of influence going up this way, but also, you know, stuff going on in the real world can feed back and change a deeper level, if you like. It's sort of a hierarchy of perception and conception, and that's I comment on that in some detail in the book. So, you know, well, let me go on to the next slide. So if you take that model, that's all it is. It's just a thought model, really, and then apply it to educational culture, we get something like that, where the educational paradigm influences the sense of purpose, which influences policy, which influences provision and content, and which influences practice and pedagogy. I'm not talking about a deterministic relationship, but the idea of influence. And yeah, so if we don't actually look at the deeper levels, it's a bit like building an eco house on unsupported foundations, or foundations which may be unsupported. So you will know, I think, those of you involved in this whole area, there's now quite a lot of discussion about purpose and repurposing organizations in the light of the sustainability crisis. So if we look at that, I think, you know, taking Donella Meadows' work, you know, if we can change paradigm and purpose of an organization, then everything else changes. So then if we apply that to education and maybe the purpose of a particular university or school or whatever, you might think of this as kind of model. You know, what is the purpose as it was, as it is, because it's been through a lot of change, education, the sense of purpose over the past 30 years, as it should be, that's up for discussion, and as it could be, because there may be a difference between what it should be and what's actually realizable and practicable. But it's a discussion, or it should be a discussion, and that leads me to then ask, what are the present purposes of education? And this is again a slide which I've had for some time. So you could say there are four main purposes. So the socialization, vocational, the liberal humanist, which goes back a long time, and then the newer one, which is the whole education for change movement, to facilitate change towards a better and livable world. So clearly, at the moment, 1 and 2 are still in the ascendancy, and I think a lot of people are recognizing, including, you know, this huge, massive push from UNESCO, that this transformative function needs to be much more to the fore, and possibly allow an embracing new paradigm for education as a whole, where these other functions are incorporated into this bigger conception of the role of education. Okay, so I'm coming to my last six slides. You may be pleased to hear. Okay, so again, some of my work is around this idea of responsibility, which is, okay, so we can argue that individuals, lecturers, policymakers, senior managements, whoever, ministry people, should respond to the sustainability crisis. Some years ago, I thought of this word which doesn't exist in the English dictionary, which is responsibility, which is the ability to respond. And for good reasons, some people, some institutions are not able to respond, even if they want to, because of constraints of one sort or another. But supposing there is some facility to respond adequately, or try to make that response, then we can look at different levels of respond, which can be seen to correspond with learning theory. And I've actually drawn a lot on Gregory Bateson's ideas about levels of learning, which is another whole area which I explained in my book. So he makes a distinction between no learning at all, which which is no response at all. You know, either because it's the issue is not recognized or denied in some way. Secondly, a build-in, if you like, accommodation where sustainability or whatever it is, the challenge is accommodated and to some extent neutralized because of that. So that's first order learning, which there's no real change in the system. It's just to some extent sort of light green, kind of tweaking kind of response to these issues. And I think we could all think of examples of where that happens. Conformative. So the third one is more towards second order learning, where there's some rethinking of assumptions, some examination of values and guiding principles goes on, which is clearly a deeper response, whether it's at individual or institutional level. And then the deeper still is the transformative response, where the sustainability ethos, in a sense, is reflected throughout the purpose and policy and practice of an institution. And that sort of goes back again to UNESCO's wish for education to be transformed, and I just think their rhetoric is not really matched by deep explication, if you like, of what that means at an individual or institutional level. So some of this stuff is trying to put a few thought models into that mix, if you like. And I've generated quite a few slides, partly from experience. For those of you who don't know, I was what was I, 10 years, I think, no, 12 years at University of Plymouth, where we surprisingly had a mandate to try and integrate sustainability ideas and the word transformation was used, a sort of transformative way across the university in all respects, not just teaching and learning, which is difficult enough, but in community relations and research and campus management and even the culture of the place. And to an extent we succeeded, and to an extent we failed. But some real change took place, and I think we certainly got to that third level, reformative, and for some people went beyond, for sure. So some of the stuff that I do comes out of that 12 years of experience at Plymouth, as well as working with other universities and organizations. Okay, so the next slide is another thought model, if you like, which is born of experience. So I think an important thing to say here is that, well, the important words is at the bottom, learning journey, because I think I haven't got a slide to make this point, but one of the things I talk about a lot is how this whole embrace of the sustainability agenda, that's just a shorthand, of course, has to involve learning. So learning journey, and I'll make this point now before I forget it, is one of the key points in the book, is that I'm arguing that the educational enterprise, the whole caboodle, the whole conventional education enterprise, needs to see itself as part of and contributing to the societal transformation that is being called for loudly by scientists and by experts internationally now, rather than just live in its own cocoon, almost isolated from that shift. So the great leap, the great transition, we must create all these bodies of work about societal transformation. For me, ideally, education would see itself as part of that learning journey the society has to make, and engage with that and be part of it. And I argue that at some length argue that point at some length in the book. Anyway, so back to this. So yes, the conventional response in a university, let's say, is to do the things on the left, which is absolutely fine, because you've got to start somewhere. I wouldn't criticize any university having a go, but as long as they don't think that's it, and some do, of course. I think a few changes here and there that's what they do, and they can tick the box, and that includes some universities' response to the Sustainable Development Goals, where they take one or two of them, and somebody in some department somewhere addresses that particular goal, and the university says, yes, we do the SDGs, and that's it, without any holistic cross and transdisciplinary kind of work taking place, innovative work taking place. So I see this left-hand response, the whole responsibility thing, as being a first step. And then hopefully a university institution can work towards, it's not a jump, towards these kinds of ideas on the right, which is a much more dynamic, integrative, and I think exciting way of being as a university, but not at all easy to achieve. You know, sadly, with Schumacher College gone, which is really bless it, it was incredibly radical in putting this stuff into operation, but showing it's possible, even though I would admit it on a small scale. Okay, and then for the practitioners amongst you, I do quite apart from all these big ideas, I do have tools which hopefully are helpful. So the next one is an example of that. So I have a number of these kind of things. They're sort of key questions really to stimulate thinking in debate. And I'll just maybe let you read that for a second, get the idea of it. Okay, so, and then the next one, similarly, I've got some inquiry questions which I developed some time ago. So these could be used in any way, really, or developed in any way. You could say it's developing critical intelligence or systemic intelligence, trying to really get to the heart of any particular issue that's being discussed or in hand. Okay, last couple of slides, I think. It's 4:45. So the next slide is about well, two years ago, myself and two co-editors, which were Professor Ian Stewart from Plymouth and Dr. Victoria Hirth from Plymouth, we got together and put together a call for a special issue of an online journal called Frontiers in Sustainability. And the issue was, I think it was progress, something about, I can't remember exactly, I should, sorry about that, but progressing education towards sustainable human futures, something like that, or progressing universities, I think it was, towards sustainable human futures. And we put the call out and we got 24 really good papers, both theoretical and practical. And it was a great job to put that lot together. And the reason I'm saying that is because we learned from it. We learned from the exercise on what people are saying, what people are doing, and some affirmation of our own work in what was coming back from those papers. And it's still online. But the other interesting thing struck me anyway is that if you look online, they've given up counting the number of hits on it. It's over 150,000 hits on that ebook. So I think there's the reason I'm saying all this is I think there's a real appetite amongst universities and staff, and particularly, of course, the students who know their future is under question at the very least, for healthy, positive, hopeful alternatives. And so I think, you know, that's why, in a way, this particular SI got a good response and why there's over 150,000 hits on it. And I can give other examples of that kind of evidence that changes are happening, which I see as particularly positive and constructive, even when things are very difficult for many people. So that's that slide, which I've just been talking about. And this comes from our editorial, really, and it's pretty hard-hitting, if you like. But you can read that for yourselves, really. And to put it crudely, you know, we're trying to put a boot up the backside of policymakers and practitioners really saying, come on, guys, you know, we believe in the power of education and learning. We really do. And learning has to be fundamental to the kind of transformations we need, but only if we actually look critically at what we're doing already and see what changes need to be made to make it effective in that regard. So that we come up with those 5 conclusions. So that's a kind of quick romp through some of the ideas and the context of the whole thing and why I put the book together and the way I did. It sounds like a vanity project. It wasn't, you know. I really wanted to try and put my stuff together in a way which people found helpful, having been working on it for years. So I put together 10 previously published papers, and I'm coming to the end now. And top and tail them really, so people have an introduction to my work. And what happened, of course, it's much more difficult than I thought, and so now about 40% of it is new writing, and I you know, it's a contribution to the debate. That's what I would claim for it really, and that's a little bit about it. So that's it, and that's it for the talk too. And thanks so much for being here. And I look forward to a discussion.
Thank you, Stephen. That was excellent indeed. And I see there are quite a lot of questions and comments in the chat. And if people would like to fire away with questions, it would be useful if you could potentially turn your camera on so we can see you a little bit. And Stephen, if you could stop sharing, we could then go to a full view of people. And the first hand up is, I noticed in the chat already. Elvira, please fire away. Thanks.
Hello, and thank you. That was a really, really interesting talk. Thank you for this, Stefan. I am currently at Schumacher College. We're not dead yet. We're not closed yet.
Good. Good for you.
The trust on which the college stands, and who also is in charge of the money and the finances, has decided to shut the place down. It will close at the end of the coming months, but there is a lot of work being put in by everybody to actually revive it. And there's many things anyone can do that is interested in supporting this movement of a new and independent Schumacher College. So I'm going to also post a link about that in the chat in a second. But thank you very much, of course, for mentioning this place and the people who have been really important to this place, who have moved on. I have been at the college for a while. I was here last year as a grower, and now I'm here as a volunteer. So I've been really fortunate to see transformational education in practice, and that in a way that is pretty much unique. And at the same time, I was seeing it in practice and yet not, because there's so many ways in which you can do this. And I'm interested to hear more about the ways in which you, on a personal teaching level, what you do. What is it that you do to create transformative learning experiences? How can we, in the classroom and beyond, make this transformation, whether our universities and faculties are on board or not? What are concrete steps, and what have you experimented with or seen? I would be super, super interested in that.
Well, I mean, funnily enough, but you won't be surprised to hear that my best experiences come from working at and with Schumacher over years, which is so conducive to change. And actually, I did a research project at the college 20 years ago about what it was that made the college conducive to transformative learning experiences. And, you know, you can easily list those ingredients, but I remember somebody else at some point saying to me, it's actually true that the college, the unique list of ingredients which make the college what it is or what it was, certainly make transformative learning much more possible or even probable. But I remember her saying, I've done some pretty crazy things in a really dull environment before. so it's how you do it, really. And I am also influenced by somebody who is not recognized enough, I think, an Australian academic called Richard Borden, and I drew on his work quite a bit. And he talks about developing critical learning systems. So getting away from the learning as an individual to learning as a group. And of course, that goes back to the Schumacher experience too, where you take the issues themselves rather than start off with the filter, whether it's, you know, geography or science or economics or whatever it is. So instead of working with the filter first, you work with the issue first, and then see what filters you need to, you know, in order to understand that. But I also think that working over time is also very conducive to deeper shifts in perception and thinking. But not necessarily that because you know, everybody's different, and just even small experiences, you know, particularly with nature, can shift perceptions in an instant. So there's no, I'm sure everybody knows, there's no formula for transformative learning, but there are conditions by which it is more likely. Let's put it that way. And I've tried to create those when I do my teaching. And I think the other thing I got from Richard Borden is the whole issue of critical questioning. And one of his phrases is that ideas should be ethically defensible. And I think the idea of being ethically defensible is a deep challenge, you know, and should lead to, or can lead to, shifts of perception in discussing that.
Thank you, Avira. Anybody else got a question? We had quite a few ideas, opinions, and comments coming in the chat from Anne and Jamie and Madeline and Helen and Morgan and Dave and John. If anybody's got a question, please fire away now. Andy, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, and long time no see, Stephen. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I just dropped a question into the chat there about I guess the challenge about, you know, small is beautiful by all means, but we've got to get to some kind of scale in relatively short term, bearing in mind the urgency of our climate and nature emergencies. And, you know, one of the conversations that I've been having with Morgan, who's also on the call, and we'll be talking with Anne about next week, is wondering collectively, you know, if there are around about 100 million teachers in the world, you know, how many of those would you want to be confident to be teaching and talking about this work within the handful of years in which we need to be doing it, so that they can train the young people to shape that future? And I'd just love to hear your thoughts on who's doing the most, I guess the whole goal piece around thinking about that scale, because none of the organizations I've looked at in terms of the people training youth leaders and stuff are doing anything of any significant scale. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the whole influence of the last 10, 20 and 30 years is deeply unhelpful. as you know, the whole sort of neoliberal sort of, you know, I got one of my things is the whole neoliberalism has influenced what I call the squeeze. So we've had the purpose of education squeeze, we've had the breadth of learning squeeze, we've had the depth of learning squeeze. You know, I came into education as a young man in the early 70s, and I was a classroom teacher, and things were pretty good in many ways. I had a much more holistic view of what learning was, and what the learner needed, and what the learner brought to the situation, and so on. So I think to some extent it's a matter of reclaiming older educational values, but putting that together with the whole world-mindedness a bit, and we have to just have to combat the sort of baleful and narrowing influence of the neoliberal project, which universities, I know they've been pushed that way by government policy, but universities tended to go along that route far too easily. But you know, there's questions of strategy here. I mean, all universities, if we're talking about universities, want to be responsible and want their graduates to go out and being responsible and able, resourceful citizens. So, you know, it's a matter of actually putting them, making them accountable on these sort of wonderful mission statements that they make. Internationally, you know, you've got these movements that I talked about. You know, got this stuff going on through UNESCO and UN and all the rest of it, which is good. I mean, it's happening, but it's not, as I've tried to say, it's not the critique involved in that is not deep enough. So you know, anybody can register on, I think, on some of these conferences. So get your voice in there. I'm encouraging people to do that. The SDG Academy is doing a lot of good work. The SDSN network is doing a lot of good work. You know, whether it's enough, whether it's going to succeed, who knows? But what I try to do, and I'm only one person and one voice, I try to put out keys, if you like, and tools which people can use to make their own work more effective, and also be able to argue or make the case, I should say, when they come up against barriers. You know, I don't have all the answers, obviously, even after 50 years, for goodness sake, but I'm encouraged by the amount of questioning that's going on in education, but it has to move down fast to make the kind of difference we need.
Great, yeah. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. There, Jamie, you have a hand up there. Yeah.
Yes, a good follow-up question to that one, and this is for Stephen or anyone that has any insights. I'm still quite disappointed in pre-service education, at least in the US. We have maybe 10 pre-service institutions dipping a toe into education for sustainability. They seem to be focused on compliance. What advice or insights do you have for encouraging pre-service education to join the learning revolution?
Well, I don't know if there's anybody working on that sector. I'll just put a quick answer in before anybody else jumps in. But hi, Jamie.
Hi, Stephen.
Great you could join us. I'm sorry about the late notice yesterday. I mean, what I would say to that, and also to almost any policymaker, decision maker on education, is look at what young people are saying. You know, it's their future, and we're going to fail them unless we give them the tools and the ideas and resources to adapt to a very uncertain, unpredictable, and frankly fairly scary world. You know, and so if we're not actually addressing young people's concerns and needs, then you know, what the hell are we doing? You know, I that's a powerful argument. It's the Greta Thunberg argument, if you like, but I mean, there's powerful movements amongst the young on education, and there's other aspects of life which I think we need to, you know, I've said somewhere in the book, I think we need to catch up with where young people are and give them what they need. That's my quick answer on
that. Thank you, Stephen. I think that's an important point there. It's coming through from the future generations, I think, are the ones we need to look for to make that transformation happen a great deal. Thanks. Kia, your hand's up. Yeah. I can't hear you, Kia. Sorry, yeah, we still can't hear you. Never mind. If you'd like to put it into the chat, that might help. I could read it out. But has anybody else got a comment beforehand there. Claudia, can we try you?
Hello. Thank you for that, Stephen. That was super interesting. I wanted to ask, it's kind of a question in two parts. You obviously want to see a big shift and a big change in kind of how we're thinking about education. And the first kind of question is, could you just give some slightly more concrete examples of the kind of changes that you would want to see, or what that might look like to you? And then secondly, what do you think are the biggest barriers to those changes at the moment?
I had a lot of trouble hearing that, Ian.
Practical example and greatest barriers. More practical examples of what it looks like to do what you're talking about, and what are some of the biggest barriers. Did I catch it, Claudia?
Yeah, no, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, so when I wrote the book, you know, as ever, as one does, you do quite a lot of research about what's going on, and by doing that, I came across all kinds of new initiatives I didn't know about. I mean, there's stacks going on, which is cause for hope, really. So I quickly updated my website, and there's a whole list. There's a whole list of organizations, some of which are not specifically addressed to education, but doing good work in a wider context. But some are around education and learning. So check out my website, which is on the slides at the end there. No, it wasn't actually. I forgot to give you the last slide. Sorry about that. It's sustainableeducation.co.uk. What was I going to say? Put myself off there. Yeah, okay. So check out those examples. Also, just a couple of years ago, I was involved in an initiative by the Great Transition Initiative of GTI, on, I think they called it the Pedagogy of Change or something like that. So look up the Great Transition Initiative, because I wrote the lead paper for that discussion, and then the membership is about 1,000 people around the world are invited to respond to the lead paper, which was looking at all these issues. And what came back was some terrific ideas, both theoretical but also practice ideas. So half the responses were taking the thinking forward, and half the responses were innovative practice. So have a look at that. That's still current. Also, I was very lucky to be on the international jury for the UNESCO Japan ESD Prize for 5 years, and as the jury, myself, must have looked at about 500 applications for this prize over 5 years, about 100 a year, and they were terrific stuff going on. I had no idea. Some of that you can find on UNESCO's site if you look at the ESD Japan Prize. Some of it's not there, sadly, because they put the winners up and nobody else. But that 5 years working on the international jury, UNESCO Japan ESD Prize, I came away thinking, this is fantastic. You know, don't be too gloomy, because there's great stuff going on, even when it's maybe not supported by the mainstream. And I think it's going on because people maybe have given up on getting enlightened policy from the centre, and they're just, as you might say, doing it anyway, particularly in community education and adult education, which is easier to area to be innovative in. But these kind of experiences made me think, well, you know, something's happening here. You know, whether it's enough and in time is another issue, but there is a lot of good stuff happening. And you know, I see Anne has commented, Anne Finlayson, to have a look at the SEED site, the SEED site. Again, there's lots of stuff happening there, which Anne's organisation reports on periodically. So yeah, so there we are. There's I think that's the answer to that for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah.
The biggest barrier, if I didn't answer that bit, the biggest barrier is the way as the paradigmatic issue, which I talked about in some length. You know, people not recognizing there's an issue at all, or what the alternatives are. And I think what I'm trying to do is address those two issues, really.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Steve Martin, you have
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks, Stephen. You and I know one another well enough.
Yeah.
So I shall just say this. I think one of the things that, you know, despite yours and many other people's eloquence and convincing arguments, this message is not getting to where the decisions are being made. I mean, the governance systems, as I put it in the chat box, are not fit for purpose. I mean, the senates of university, for argument's sake, and the senior executives are not talking about paradigmic shifts or the kind of nuanced arguments you've just evocatively and characteristically made. They're not talking about these sorts of things. And transformative aid it's business as usual and safeguarding the financial nature of those institutions to continue as is normal. And, you know, I'm not sure what the answer is, Stephen, but the message has to get into those areas where that's a conversation. Otherwise, we're talking to ourselves. And I don't want to be negative about it, because what you're saying is very positive. But the negativity in me says we're not getting the message through.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. Okay, there's two things. One is I feel that, you know, I talked about stuff really good stuff happening on the margins, which it really is. The UNESCO stuff's happening in the center, and that's a major influence. You know, they've got all these member states, and I know it's not where it should be, but at least that discussion's taking place. So there is a pull at the center, but also, you know, if you take a systems view, which Ian would be pleased I mentioned, I'm sure, then we have to work at every level. And we encouraged, when we were at Plymouth, the student body to talk to the senior management. And I see that, and certainly the NUS and Students Organising for Sustainability, Jamie Agenbar's organisation, sees the student body as a major lever, because they hold the purse strings. They're the people with the money that spend it on the university. So you have to look at the levers which we have and work them as effectively as you possibly can. Notwithstanding all the barriers and negative factors which certainly are in operation. But I go back to a previous point that universities seem to be responsible, and the other, so we can work on that. And the other point I'd make is that you know, there's increasing numbers of environmental research institutes and global systems institutes up and down the country. And I think those academics and climate scientists and so on in those institutes are becoming much more vocal. And I think that is another seat of change, if you like. So, you know, I think it's being realistic about the barriers and the issues, but also being clever about making the best use of the levers we do have.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. I've really good points there about bringing things together. Top down, bottom up is often the best approach to do both at the same time. Anne, thank you. You have a hand up there.
Thank you, Stephen. Lovely slides and lovely use of them. And that's a joke between you and me, I know. And thank you for the heads up about seed. I mean, I love the slides and I love what you're saying, and I've always loved your deep thinking on this, and but then some practical things. And I have come more and more to the realization. I don't work in university, I work with schools and communities, and I have come more and more to the realization that actually this is about questioning the language that we use and that other people use, because you get the head nod constantly, and actually they have a different meaning to what you think you're saying and they think what you're saying. So for me, that idea about questioning the words that they use is part of that paradigm shift. And I don't know whether, have you done any work on the narrative that people, engage in? Do we need a new narrative, or do we continue to use the words that other people are using in the hope that eventually they'll get it? I must admit, I'm a bit lost on that one.
Mhm.
Well, it's a great question, Anne, and I think it's really tricky. I've certainly written about this whole issue of labels and nomenclature and what labels we use, because you know as well as I do that the whole field is almost trapped by this endless different labels and what people might mean by them, and the tensions that exist between these different labels, education for this and education for that. I think what I try to do in my own work is sort of jump aside from that, really, to say, in a way, I don't care what label people use, really. It's the values and assumptions behind what they're doing which counts. Having said that, I know you need labels to make some kind of communicate, but what I'm trying to do is outline, right from that little green book I did 20 years ago for the Schumacher Institute and Sustainable Education, is outline the difference between a mechanistic way of seeing education and an ecological way of seeing education. So if people get that, then they can start developing their own thinking around that. And I've been very lucky that's actually been effective in some ways, but also, I'm reluctant to start introducing new terms. I've just finished writing a critique of ESD, by the way, Education for Sustainable Development, for the journal I mentioned earlier, because I think, even though I was one of the first people to actually use that phrase in 1991, I now think it's not helping us very much. In fact, it's actually in a way preventing us from embracing a more holistic and expansive view of what education is and could be. But I'm quite persuaded, I suppose is a term, by regenerative education, or education for regeneration, because that ties in with community and biodiversity and all these, and even economic regeneration and so on. So I think that's actually possibly a useful term. I've used it a bit myself. I don't know if Elizabeth Lange is with us today, but Elizabeth Lange, that's Lange. I just finished reviewing her, I think, a terrific book where she makes a strong case for relationality as a central concept of rethinking education, and I'm happy to go along with that. But so I'm not sure I've thrown much light on it, Anne, but I mean it is actually a big question, and I think that asking questions about meaning in any situation is vital, and it's almost going back to Socrates, and it's Socratic questioning, really. To get to it reminds me of Schumacher's line that we need to get to the depths of things, and so often we don't. And I think critical questioning is one means by which we can do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Paul.
Hi, Stephen. Long time no see.
Hello, Paul.
I'm actually wanting to use the fact that you can hear me to read out Kia's question, because Kia is a colleague at Plymouth and very much represents the future of educators trying to embrace this. So I just wanted to read her question out to you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Kia's written, how can individual educators who feel a lack of empowerment within their institutions navigate the concept of responsibility? It feels like agency for bottom-up action is stunted in growth by managerial forces that are often more focused on following paradigms of marketization. So I just think it's that challenge of how do we actually work this out within a system that is following a very different paradigm and very different forces of control and resource allocation and pressure. So yeah, I would imagine that's an easy ask.
Yeah, easy peasy, Paul. Look, it sort of goes back to what I've already said, really. I mean, let's take the extreme example. If you can't do anything at all, your hands are completely tied, then go somewhere else. So it's fairly brutal advice, but if you've got a lot of potential and it's been completely sat on, then try and get a job somewhere else. But I mean, let's assume you can do something, because one of my experiences years ago was working on a Indian reserve in northern Canada, which was hopeless in most respects, and for the kids and for me as a teacher. And what I learned from that is if you can do something in almost any situation, and for me, those years ago, it was forming good relationship with the kids, and that was very fulfilling and worked. So I think you need to do an assessment of what the situation is. Look for any kind of opening for doing something different and innovative, even if it's within your own lecture hall or classroom, even if it's for 10 minutes. You've got to do something to exercise that, scratch that itch, if you like. Beyond that, what we found at Plymouth when we were working as a team is to find allies. It's really difficult to do stuff by yourself, which is innovative and makes any kind of splash. Find allies, across university, get together, even informally, so you've got some support. If you can get some initiative going which gets outside recognition and even some kind of publicity and prize, that's a prize ticket. You can take that to the senior management. They go, oh wow, fantastic, well done, do some more of that. So that's what we did all those years ago. We won the Green League and we got Green Gown Awards and all the rest of it. So that persuades the university that something's important and useful to support is going on. Then you can build on that. Look at other universities, what they're doing, and saying, and then use that as a leverage. Say, shouldn't we be doing that? Look, they're getting all kinds of money and recognition for what they're doing. Shouldn't we be doing that too? So these are all the kind of tricks you have to employ to make things happen. And it's a matter of being strategic and being a little bit clever and keeping an eye for opportunities the whole time. So I hope that helps a little bit. I mean, the book I wrote for the Higher Education Academy years ago, called the Future Fit Framework, has quite a lot of, which you can still get from Advanced HE, has quite a lot of ideas about this kind of thing.
Thank you, Stephen. And sorry, Kia, I missed your question in the chat, and thank you, Paul, for pointing that out and reading it out. Thank you. Very good discussion there. Virginia.
Thank you, Ian, and good to meet you, Stephen. After many, many, many years, you won't remember me. Thank you for your talk and also your slides. A couple of questions really from me. Inevitably, as a result of the work you've been doing, your focus is on universities.
Yeah.
But everything you say applies even more to primary, junior, secondary schools. I wondered what your view is on methodologies that are established, but which are constantly squashed by the Department for Education and Ofsted. For example, Waldorf education or Montessori education or Reggio Emilia education. Although there are quite a lot of balmy bits in those different educations, the fact remains that a lot of what you've said, like having a main lesson, issue-based, creativity, the practical elements of learning are all in those systems. And before you answer your question on that, I just wanted to also highlight that there is a course at Bath Spa now that's in its 3rd year, PG DIP, which is called Waldorf Education and Creative Pedagogies. And this is targeting particularly mainstream teachers who've got QTS, who actually want to go and learn how to teach differently, teaching and learning. So really my question is, what views do you have of these established methodologies that are being conducted in lower down the education chain?
Do you mean like Waldorf and Montessori? And
Yes.
Steiner? Yeah. Well, these have a fine pedigree, don't they? And they have a much more holistic view of the learner and what learning consists of. And you know, I'm all for them. You know, it's represents some of the best of how education used to be before it got completely squeezed by the bean counting kind of neoliberal kind of narrow view of education, which is almost equates to training rather than the real meaning of education, which is drawing out and so on. So you know, I'm not qualified really to talk about schools because I haven't hardly been near a school for years, but so I'm a bit of a fraud on that one really. But you know, anything which respects the learner, respects the child, and has a broader view of education, quite apart from intellectual knowing, has to be a good thing. You know, gosh, yes. I mean, it reminds me. It reminds me of a quote which I used from Theodore Roszak in my 2001 book for the Institute, and I don't remember it exactly, but it's something. Roszak says something about, you know, how Jack can write and add up and do science experiments, but he has no imagination or creativity and is deeply unhappy and can't dance and can't sing and all the rest of it. You know, it's a great quote, and it's where we've got to. You know, this horribly narrow conception of education as a means of fitting people into whatever, you know, the machine. It is a travesty of a deep, humanistic, and I would say spiritual interpretation of what education is and could be. Yeah.
Thank you. Perhaps just to add to that, if I may, one of my roles is, hence my question, is Vice Chair of the Waldorf Learning Foundation. And we're working with the Hereford Waldorf Academy, Steiner Academy, because they are the only state-funded Steiner school in the country. And our aim is to try and persuade the Department for Education, and it may be now with Labour, we may have more of a chance to actually start state funding more of these schools rather than they have to be independent, which by definition limits access. So I just wanted to spread the news about that. Thank you very much for your response.
That's great. Good luck indeed.
Thank you. Lovely. Right. If there are any more questions, please put your hand up. But I think it's you know, time to say a big thank you to Stephen. I think, you know, it sort of sum up. There's a, you know, education has got a huge momentum of its own in some respects, and trying to shift and try to introduce and encourage a new paradigm is nothing that can be done simply and overnight. I just wondered, Stephen, from my thinking here, you talked about GTI and its attempts to develop a sort of global citizenship network. I wondered whether its task should be to try to introduce this transformative education that's needed, in the sense that we are all learning all the time. Lifelong learning doesn't actually have to happen within any institution at all. So this is where, we need everybody to start getting into this stuff and doing it, whether it's formally or informally. That was my last thought, and I would, say thank you very much indeed for what you've presented to us today, and hopefully everybody else would similarly applaud you. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen.
Well, thanks, Ian, and thanks everybody for hanging in there. And I'm sorry I just can't, address all these messages, which look really interesting and really thoughtful. So it's been great to be part of this. I'm not plugging the book. I suppose my publisher said I should, but would say I should. But if you're interested in this work in more detail, do have a look at it, because there's some years poured into it one way or another. And wherever you are and whatever you're doing, good luck, because this is important work for all of us. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. Very important work indeed. Thank you, everybody, and take care, and see you again next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Good. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay.
I think that was good, and indeed, and look, I look forward to reading your book. Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, Ian, many thanks. It's been a good experience, and I hope people got something out of it. I think they probably did.
Great. Right. Take care of yourself and see you again.
Yeah, all the best, Ian. Yeah, hope to see you in the flesh at some point.
Yeah, that could be good.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers for now.